Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Revolution 250 podcast. I am Bob Allison. I chair the Rev 250 advisory group. We're a consortium of 75 organizations in Massachusetts planning commemorations of American independence. And our guest today is Joyce Lee Malcolm. Joyce Malcolm is the Patrick Henry Professor of Constitutional Law and the Second Amendment Emerita at the Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University. But she's not a law professor. She's an historian, and she's written a number of terrific books about the Revolution. Her latest one is The Times That Try Men's Souls, about the Adamses, the Quincy's, and the battle for loyalty in the American Revolution. But we're here to talk about your penultimate book, I guess, is The Tragedy of Benedict Arnold, An American Life. So, Joyce, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to talk about these books and with your audience.
That's great. And so Arnold, I mean, he's synonymous with the traitor, but he's early in the war. He is really this key character, key figure in it, in promoting the cause of independence. So I guess the big question is why he changes sides and why he is now almost exclusively remembered for being a traitor.
You know, Arnold has actually been felt to be the best officer on either side during the Revolution, and had contributed his own money, wounded, and fought on many battlefields, and probably is really responsible for bringing the French in and our winning the war.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a man for whom honor mattered a great deal. And after he was wounded at Saratoga, he was sent to Philadelphia, where the British had just evacuated, and Americans were coming back on another Congress. And the radicals, I should say, never realized that the patriots were divided between radicals and moderates.
Right,
the radicals really were the governing body in the state of Pennsylvania. And they resented him. They were upset at everything he did, and brought all these charges against him, insisted that there be a court-martial, and the court sent these charges against him out to every other state. And it took months before they actually had the court-martial. He couldn't defend himself. So it was really very, very difficult for him. He was attacked in the street by these radicals. Congress refused to give him any protection. They insisted he still owed them money from one of his campaigns, even though they hadn't paid him for 3 years.
Yeah.
Finally, it was all too much. And I think that he felt dishonored. And in fact, he was dishonored. And I think that's what made him decide to change sides. And I should also add, it looked like the British were going to win. And so there's always the argument, well, they were promising the Americans everything but independence. And maybe it would be better to just end the war and spare any more bloodshed.
Yeah, and he also, it's interesting you say that the Saratoga victory is responsible for bringing the French in, because then when he writes his reasons, the French alliance is actually one of them he gives as a reason for then changing sides.
That's I hadn't noticed that particular because there were a lot of people who worried about the French alliance. The French king was no friend to liberty. France had been the old enemy, especially in England. So there were many who felt that the French were going to get too much control over the Americans. This was not a good alliance.
Yeah, it's interesting. And he does have some folks who really don't like him, the Adamses, you make clear, but then Joseph Reed, Horatio Gates. I think we can look at certain characters who have an individual reason for disliking him. Why don't we talk about some of these characters who just don't like Benedict Arnold?
He didn't suffer fools gladly. He was a very brave man, and he didn't like cowards. Gates, Horatio Gates, who was the commanding officer at Saratoga, really disliked him, but partly it was because he disliked Washington, and Arnold was one of Washington's favorite generals. So Gates was sort of against those who Washington favored, and Arnold was one of these. There were other ones that felt that he had gotten too much credit.
Hmm.
Adams was always worried that a popular general in the army might disband the Continental Congress, and they would have something like what the British had in their revolution and a civil war, that
Right. Yeah.
Cromwell would rise up, a general,
Yeah.
and take over. So they were always suspicious of
Yeah.
officers. They court-martialed them all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's that fear of that, and then and it's reading your book, seeing how much that Cromwell looms in all of this, and the English Civil War. I mean, that's the history they knew about what happens with popular generals.
Yes, that they could take over, that they had the weapons. And it's interesting to me because you have the same sort of ruling class, as it were, or
Hmm.
in America, and half of them become politicians, half of that group, and are in Congress. The other half go into the army. But the
Yeah,
ones that go into Congress immediately worry that the ones
that's
in
right.
the army are going to be too powerful. And so they always kept the army on a short leash, and
Mm.
Washington was very patient with that. But
Yeah,
Arnold was not. Um,
yeah.
Washington was amazing that he put up with it.
Really, he's really a master at that, at deferring to Congress and then tendering his commission to Congress at the end of the war and going home. It's because he also understands this history and this tension.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that George III was supposed to have said, when he heard that Washington had tendered his commission, that if he does that, he must be the greatest man that ever lived.
Yeah.
To give up all of that power.
Yeah.
And
And and knowing that Congress is completely ineffectual at this time as well. So
I've always been slightly suspicious of whether Congress could have helped the army more than it did, but I don't have that. I don't have the evidence. So
okay, you think which side would you be on, that they could have, or they?
I think they could have done more than they
Yeah.
did. And one of the things that they did that was enraged Washington was that they got these soldiers of fortune from European countries, and they would give them some rank that was above the Americans who had been
Right.
struggling.
Right.
It was terribly unpopular, and they didn't care whether Washington was in favor of it or not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The more I'm finding out about the revolution, the more I am on the side that Congress really, they're creating problems by attempting to micromanage something when they're not actually doing what they should be doing, which is paying for this whole effort, and distrustful of anyone who wants to do more.
While they were arguing that Arnold owed the money, they hadn't paid him for 3
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. Yeah. And the charges that are brought against him, I mean, did he use these wagons to send something to Egg Harbor Town, to New Jersey? That's becomes one of these major issues, major reasons that they want to cashier him.
Yeah, they were all kind of financial, sort of secular charges. There was nothing
Mm.
military about them. But sometimes it's easy to forget that the Continental Congress is in Philadelphia. And so they're kind of under the thumb of the Pennsylvania government. And the Pennsylvania government was incensed about these wagons that he
Right.
used and paid for. And they said that they actually threatened to secede if
Yeah.
if Arnold wasn't,
Wow.
court-martialed about.
Wow. Yeah, so Washington is in this dilemma because here he has one of his best officers, but Congress hates him. And
Yeah, it's very hard. And then Washington, I think Washington let him down because this court-martial was supposed to start on May 1st, and the Pennsylvania people kept delaying it and delaying
Yeah.
it. It didn't happen until December. And
Mm.
all that time, Arnold never got a chance to vindicate himself.
Right.
And then
Mhm.
one other thing that I had known about, and that is that Arnold, who'd been badly injured, he was still a cripple after Saratoga, suggested to Washington that he be given a command in the Navy, and he had all these
Right.
plans, and that would have been perfect because he was
Mm.
really well trained and had been brought up
Mhm.
sailing ships, and it would have been super. And for some
Mhm.
reason, Washington didn't want to do that. I think if he
Yeah.
had done that things would have
Yeah.
turned out differently.
Yeah, we're talking with Joyce Lee Malcolm about her book, The Tragedy of Benedict Arnold, An American Life. And as we were saying before we started, most books about Arnold begin with the treason, but you begin with Saratoga, which is this tremendously important moment, which is actually after what Arnold has had 3 years of experience leading men. Um, and he's wounded. Actually, he had been wounded in Quebec, and in the same leg, he's shot in Saratoga. It's a tremendous moment.
It is. And one of the things that's most amazing to me is that the general in charge, Horatio Gates at Saratoga, whose tent was so far off the battlefield he couldn't even see what was happening,
Yeah.
confined Arnold to his own tent because he was
Yeah.
angry at him. He said, "You have no purpose here. Go back to Washington." He really disliked him. And Arnold couldn't stay in his tent with the battle raging. And so he got a horse and he went out with no command. He didn't have any command. And he said, if the men don't follow me, I will fight in the ranks. And he went out and they all cheered and they followed this officer who they respected, but who had no command on that battlefield.
So, and if things had gone badly, of course, Gates would have had someone to blame.
Well, I think that the fact they went well was not his. I mean, when he was in his tent, because the battle,
that's right.
He was spending his time arguing about the merits of the revolution with a wounded British officer. So I felt sorry for this poor guy dying. Well,
Imagine
the revolution was a good thing.
Imagine in your last moments arguing with Horatio Gates about the merits of the revolution. And Joseph Reed is another character that runs afoul of Arnold, and there's this attack. James Wilson, another Philadelphia political figure, his house is under siege by the radicals.
Yeah, there were a group of patriotic moderates in Philadelphia, and who really didn't want to punish everybody. It was the radicals. Pennsylvania didn't have a single governor; they had a council. And the radicals, including Reed, led that council. And they had, for instance, had handed Arnold a list of 300 people whose loyalty they questioned. He was supposed to just arrest people and accuse them of treason. So there was this group of moderates, and then the very radical council who controlled the militia. And at one point, it got so bad that the moderates actually holed up in Wilson's house and were attacked by this militia that had been egged on by Reed. And the shooting broke out.
Right.
And there were 6 people killed, 6 of the moderates. And a big mob outside breaking into this building, ready presumably to get them all. And in fact, Arnold heard the shooting and got there just as Reed showed up. And Reed said, "You have no business here." But he showed up, and the Continental Congress put an end to the fighting. But then the people, the moderates, all had to pay bail, whereas the mob were just amnestied, out they go. So there was this really nasty business between those two sides, which is something that I had never really thought about till I started looking at this.
It's amazing because Philadelphia the British had occupied it, and Arnold is there to kind of pacify things after the exodus of the British. But then you have this fighting between, as you said, the folks who are on the same side.
Right. Now, it was, I should say that there might have been reason to be really angry at the British, because when they left Philadelphia, they left a mess.
Yeah.
Stuff, houses they occupied, a mess. So people coming back who'd evacuated, found this terrible mess. But there's an interesting study of some treason cases that were brought against people who seemed to have sided with the British. And Wilson represented those. And the jury were residents of Philadelphia who'd seen this mess,
Hmm.
they didn't find any of them guilty, except a couple of people who were Quakers, and there was some other particular, and even then, they pleaded that they be given clemency. So there was a lot of neighborliness,
Hmm.
despite, feelings that you might have had about the way that the country had been led.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because in a revolutionary moment, you could go in any direction. You could have arrested these 300 people and taken their property, executed them, which has happened. And Arnold, Wilson are not on the side of wanting to do that, it seems.
No, and then there was a really difficult problem of trying to be a neutral.
Yeah.
The woman that Arnold marries, Peggy Shippen, her father's a judge, and
Yeah.
he was really trying to be a neutral. So they stayed when the British were there, and the British officers ate at the table, and when they left, American officers ate at their table. And her father really tried very hard to make sure that his family didn't involve his son, who had been warned not to join either side, escaped from his dad and went off to Trenton and joined the British. And he got there right before, luckily or unluckily, right before Washington crossed the Delaware and
Wow.
took young man prisoner. And because he knew the father, he let him go home. But the Shippen father was so angry that his son had disobeyed him that he made sure that he had no share in the financial aspects of the family. He just kind of cut him off. So it was very difficult, just trying to not take sides.
Well, we're talking with Joyce Lee Malcolm about her book, The Tragedy of Benedict Arnold, An American Life. Joyce Malcolm is the Patrick Henry Professor of Constitutional Law and the Second Amendment Emerita at the Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University, author of a number of other books, Peter's War, which is about a New England slave boy in the American Revolution, an interesting story. And then her book, To Keep and Bear Arms, is perhaps her most important, about the origins of the Second Amendment. I'm wondering, though, Peggy Shippen is someone who's, I think, often people who do kind of a popular history of this see Peggy Shippen extravagant, and she's the reason Arnold runs into debt. She's often or sometimes blamed for Arnold's treason. I mean, where do you come down on Peggy Shippen's role in all of this?
5 books have been written about the evil Peggy Shippen.
Yeah.
She's an 8-year-old lovely girl who married this handicapped general. I think that Peggy really had very little to do with the treason. I mean, I looked at the origins of that story, and it was from Durant in the 50s, The Secret History of the American Revolution. And his reason why he thought Peggy was involved was that she knew these officers, British officers, when they had been in Philadelphia. And one of them, John Andre, who ends up being the British head of intelligence, writes her a letter from New York, which is British. And the letter asks her if she could use anything from New York. I can get you lace, blah, blah, blah. And Peggy's reply was, no, thank you. He uses that. He said, that's exactly what she would have written. I thought I wouldn't be persuaded by that.
Yeah.
But at any rate, the thing that really persuades me is that when Arnold had decided he was posted to head the fort and he was trying to weaken it so that the British could take it. And he had her come up with their 6-month-old baby. And then he ends up with his plot discovered.
Right.
He flees, leaving Peggy and baby. And when Washington gives Peggy the choice of either going into exile with her husband, who's now going into New York, or going back to her family in Philadelphia. And she chooses to go back to her family, which was really dangerous because these were not nice people. They wanted to court-martial him. So West Point was she had to come all the way back from West
Yeah.
Point. She went back to her family, but Reed and the council would not allow her to stay there, even if she
Wow.
could get out. And so after a couple of weeks, they insisted that she go into exile. And her father, who loved her dearly, she was his favorite child, accompanied her as far as he could, toward New York. And then she spent the rest of her life in exile.
Wow. So she's her choice is to go home to her parents instead of home to her husband, who's now in exile in New York, which is, again, it's an interesting choice. And this whole plot kind of unravels at the same time Washington happens to be arriving at West Point.
Yes.
I mean, if you were writing this as a movie, you really could not plan it better to have all of these figures, coming together at the same moment at West Point.
Very dramatic.
Yeah.
What happened was that the Arnolds go between British John Andre and Arnold agreed to meet in person. There was a lot of negotiation, and everybody said that was because Arnold was greedy. But once he just defected, he would lose all his property.
Right.
He had a wife and several children. So he wanted to make sure that he would have enough money to support his family. Anyway, he and Andre agreed to meet. But then the ship that was to take Andre back, the British ship that was in the Hudson, was spotted by the Americans and had to go downstream. And so Andre, after they met, put on a disguise and had to go back through American territory. And he had in his boot the plans for West Point that Arnold had given him. And then there were these three guys who are either heroes or just brigands who wanted to get anybody well off. They spot him and they stop him when he's going through the American side. And at first he thinks they're British because one of them is wearing a kind of British jacket, but they're not. And so they take his horse and they make him take his boots off. And then they find these plans. And so they didn't know what to make of the plans, but they arrested him. And the officer, the militia officer that they gave the plans to, thought that Washington would see them. So he sent the plans to Washington. And as soon as Arnold, who was to entertain Washington for breakfast, discovers that Andre has been captured, he flees. Is taken to this ship and off.
It's hard now to believe that all this is happening in Westchester County, that this is this battleground between these different side factions, and that there are these three guys who might be on one side, might be on the other, or might just be robbers stopping travelers. Let's just back up a little bit and talk about Arnold's background, because he's not someone with great military experience before the war. That is, it does come from an interesting. The family's been in the colonies for a long time, but he starts off life as an apothecary, or starts off his trade.
Yeah, before that, his father was a merchant seaman and had his own ships that he sailed from Canada down to the Caribbean, and he took Benedict with him. They were quite well off. And Arnold was supposed to go to Yale. They sent him to boarding school. And then his father got depressed. Two of his little daughters had died of yellow fever. The business went downhill. His father became an alcoholic. Arnold was pulled out of boarding school. It was a little town, Norwich.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody knew this terrible scandal. And so Arnold was then, after being taken out of boarding school, he was sent to these apothecaries who were relatives of his mother. Quite successful, and they gave him an apprenticeship and he trained in that. And then he started his own business in New Haven and got his own ships and did his own. So he became quite a successful merchant, but there was still that class issue that he was not. He didn't go to college. I mean, John Adams always felt that Washington was an illiterate because he hadn't gone to university. So there was that snobbishness
Right. And then his sister, I mean, he then becomes the bulwark of the family, and his
Right.
sister is devoted to him to the very end.
Yeah, Hannah. She raised these three children. His first wife died in
Mm.
1776, and they had these three sons. So Hannah, his sister, looked after those children, and was in, basically on his side and helping him throughout. But then Hannah was in charge of the business, and during the war, these ships were prizes of the British, and then
Hmm.
everything went downhill. So he lost a lot, but she was very faithful to him.
Yeah. And she does make some bad investment choices while she
Yes,
is
she does.
managing. Yeah. So, yeah. So, what happens to the children? That is, he has children from his first marriage, the baby he has with Peggy. What happens to the children?
Well, Hannah looked after his older sons, and eventually, after Arnold is in Britain, he is given a grant of a lot of land in Canada, and tried to start a good business there for them. Didn't work out too well, but he and Peggy had several sons, and they all went into the British military. And there was one that, when Arnold was wounded at Saratoga, he was hit in the leg, and he refused to allow them to amputate his leg, which was a dangerous choice because he could have gotten gangrene.
Right.
He survived it painfully. But one of his sons had that same problem in the British military.
Wow.
And wouldn't allow his leg to be amputated. He got gangrene and died.
Oh my goodness.
So,
wow.
but Arnold would have wanted to join the British. They ended up fighting the French during these Napoleonic Wars.
Right.
And so he applied. He had this plan to go down to the Caribbean, which he knew well.
Yeah.
And they rejected him. And he told Peggy, they won't allow me to die a soldier's death. They just wanted to do it. That was, honor for him. And in his fight to preserve his honor, he ended up dishonoring himself ever after.
That is really why you call it the tragedy in American.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, if we can go back to the more heroic Arnold, in April of 1775, he's commander of the New Haven militia, and he's leading them up to the siege of Boston. And then he asks the Massachusetts Provincial Congress for a commission to then go take Fort Ticonderoga. What do you think spurs that particular episode? Well,
he was aware that it was just lightly guarded by the British. There were something like 60 cannon. It would have been great to have in Boston to get the British out of the city. So I think he just sort of looking for it as an important contribution. So they fund him. But unbeknownst to them, the Green Mountain Boys have also funded. And so when they meet, they both have commissions, and they're already ahead of him. So they would try to work together. But I think it was a brilliant idea, although it was no easy task to get those cannon down to Boston.
Right. That Henry Knox does that. But you have then Arnold showing up on the scene, and Ethan Allen has his guide already doing this. And it would have been some negotiation then to pull this off without either side attacking the other.
I know it was, it just showed how chaotic things were at that point. That you have these different Massachusetts authorities who are working at odds in a sense. They don't know what's going on.
And then Arnold goes on. He takes Fort St. John up further down the Richelieu River and Crown Point, and then Congress actually says we should just demolish Ticonderoga and Fort St. John, Crown Point. But Arnold has already started this quest into Quebec to bring Quebec into the war on the side of the Americans.
Yeah, Washington was very eager to have the Canadians join these lower colonies. But we have this awkward relationship with the Canadians. It's either join us or we'll bash you. So we'll fight them to join. But if they don't really want to, then you kind of try and force them. And so they launched this big attack on
Yeah.
Quebec
Yeah.
with one
And,
battalion led by General Montgomery, who had been
right.
a British general, and the other through the wilderness by Arnold. It was his own idea.
Yeah. Goes through Maine. It's a tremendous story, and then arrives at Quebec in early December of 1775, doing this almost impossible feat of bringing like 800 men through this wilderness.
Yeah, he lost half the men he started with. They were
Yeah.
carrying their boats for miles, these heavy boats, and
Mm.
ran out of food. There was not even a path, the vaguest idea of what they were going to
Yeah.
find as they went through Maine. So it's amazing that they actually got to Quebec at all.
Yeah.
Of course, the planned attack in December turned out that there was a wild snowstorm that day,
Yeah.
and they attacked anyway.
Mm.
And Montgomery was killed right off, and Arnold was wounded. But the lead then fell to Arnold, wounded as he was.
Mm.
To
Yeah.
keep these people together.
And he does in January in Quebec. So,
Yeah. One of my favorite things about Arnold too is that he's in the field hospital with a lot of other wounded people outside of Quebec. And there's this rumor that the British might attack the field hospital. So Arnold has weapons given to all of the wounded so that they can make a good show of it should the British come in. And I thought right to the end, he's ready to keep the battle going. But the British got reinforced, and so they had to leave Canada.
Yeah. What do you suppose, and we'll get to Valcour Island in a moment, but what do you suppose makes Arnold such a great leader?
I don't know. If I could, I'd like to just read you one statement by the man Fortescue, who wrote the classic history of the British Army, and who says that Arnold was the best officer. He said that Arnold possessed all the gifts of a great commander. To boundless energy and enterprise, he united quick insight into a situation, sound strategic instinct, audacity of movement, wealth of resource, swift and unerring eye in action, great personal daring, and the true magic of leadership. He just had this combination, as you say. He's never had any special training, but he had that insight and that daring, and he would lead men. He wouldn't just tell them, okay, boys, you go. He would say,
right,
come on.
Yeah. You actually have one of the soldiers saying that. It wasn't go on, boys. It was come on, boys.
Yes.
And,
so they admired him as that soldier said. He was our fighting general, and it was, the bravest man I ever knew.
Yeah. And so they will follow him, which is, I think, one of the things, the fact that we've talked about people who hate him, but then you have Washington, Nathaniel Greene, and others who see him as such a vital force. And that's, I think, what makes his betrayal to them such a painful thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So again, going back then to the Canadian campaign, the Americans are being driven out of Canada and then now up Lake Champlain, and he organizes this naval force on Lake Champlain to slow down this British assault, which works. It doesn't succeed in keeping them out, but it slows them down enough so that Carleton and his forces have to retreat before winter sets in.
Yeah, that was amazing. I mean, it's a battle that I think is much less known at Valcour Island. 1776, the British had brought this whole fleet down from Canada, down Lake Champlain, in an effort to get to Albany and take New York. And Gates, who was then a friend of Arnold's, needed to have some way of stopping them. And so he asked Arnold if he could build a fleet to stop the British. And so Arnold went to upstate New York. I'm from upstate New York. I can tell you that there couldn't have been a lot of sailors up there.
Right, yeah.
And he organized the building of 15 ships and picked out all the wood and got these all together in a matter of a few weeks. And then he planned how they were going to meet this British fleet coming down in October. And there was an island off the New York side, Valcour Island. And he had arranged to have his little fleet go up between that island and the New York shore and hide there. And Valkyrie Island wasn't even on the British maps, you know.
Hmm.
So down comes the British
Yeah.
fleet, and they go beyond Valkyrie Island. They don't know that the Americans are there. And then Arnold leads these ships out to confront them. And there was this terrific battle that went on for 7 hours with this little American fleet fighting the British big men of war and also very seasoned sailors. They knew what they were doing. And at the end of the day, the Americans were sort of badly hurt, and they pulled back into their place near the island. And the British assumed that they would get them the next morning. And they couldn't go up the other end of the island because it was too shallow. But the British had their ships out about a mile from the land. And so what Arnold arranged to do was to have all his ships quietly go beyond the British without, arousing their attention, which would have been deadly. And so that night in the mist, the American fleet, ship by ship, got past the British fleet and started going south for safety. And the next morning, the British looked around and the Americans were gone. And they eventually discovered that they had gone south and went after them. And then there was a sort of a terrific battle with the ships that were left. And eventually Arnold and one other has his own ship and one other one turn and face the British while everybody else gets away. It's a tremendous battle. And until Arnold's ship was, the mast was torn. I mean, he was totally surrounded by these British ships. And then he took what was left of the American fleet into a creek, and they burnt their ships. They took their wounded. They walked on land down to West Point. And so it was amazing. As you say, they didn't stop the British, but they slowed them down enough that the British decided that this wasn't where they wanted to spend the winter. And so they retreated back to Canada.
And it's also important because the British suddenly have this fleet that they didn't know was there. I mean, it's another element of surprise that the Americans are able to use against the British.
Oh, yes. I mean, and I don't know if anybody else could have arranged both the building of the fleet and then that battle. Because as I say, Arnold, as a child, had spent a lot of time with his father sailing. He knew ships, and also he was very brave. When his ship got stuck, he went from one ship to another, even aimed the guns. It was amazing. And there were detractors that said, "Oh, Arnold should have been able to stop the British. He was reckless in losing this fleet."
It's really an amazing. Do you take a position on the Skenesboro, Whitehall, birthplace of the American Navy versus Marblehead, Beverly, birthplace? Or do you get into that particular?
Not into that, but this is the first I knew of it. Do you have a position on it?
I don't take a position on that unless I'm talking to someone who's a partisan of one side or the other. People feelings run very high on that particular topic. Actually, one of those vessels is in the Smithsonian, one of the vessels from Arnold's fleet.
I gather that. I think that's wonderful because, those were badly damaged, and it's nice to be able to bring up.
It is,
from underwater.
The Philadelphia. We're talking with Joyce Lee Malcolm, author of The Tragedy of Benedict Arnold, An American Life. Joyce is the Patrick Henry Professor of Constitutional Law and the Second Amendment Emerita at the Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University. We've covered a lot of ground about Arnold, and of course, he's someone we could continue talking about all day. Is there anything we really should discuss before we let you go?
I think that the key, a couple of things. The honor was really important to Arnold, particularly from his childhood, where his father ended up a drunkard and a bankrupt, and he had the family. The other thing is that there's been some speculation as to why Arnold was singled out as the traitor, because there were other people who were officers who changed sides. There were a lot of farmers and others who sold food to the British because they had
Yeah.
solid currency. And there's been the suggestion that it's because he was so well known. If you made Arnold the scapegoat,
Mhm.
then everybody else who was maybe suspect could
Mm.
seize on that, and they were
Interesting.
okay. And also, after the Civil War, the sole monument to Arnold was erected, and it was a boot
Mm.
in honor of the leg that he had hurt at Saratoga, and it doesn't have his name. It's just given, in memory of
Wow.
this great soldier who helped to win that
Mm.
battle. So I think it's important to remember that he was an ordinary human being. He
Mm.
was tremendously brave. He spent his own money for his men when Congress didn't. So
Mhm.
the idea of vilifying him completely seems unfair.
It does. And before we started our podcast, you mentioned the stained glass window in
Yeah.
England. That's,
Yes, Arnold was born in Norwich,
mhm.
and after, I guess, in recent years, the town fathers of Norwich went to England, to the church where Arnold and Peggy were buried, this little church, and they put in a stained glass window in honor of Arnold, and it was erected, as they put it, by the two countries that he had supported in turn,
Mm.
side by side.
In turn.
It was, with the American flags and British flags, trying, I guess, to pay some final respects.
Mm. Fascinating story, fascinating life. We've been talking with Joyce Malcolm about her book, The Tragedy of Benedict Arnold, An American Life. So thank you so much for joining us, Joyce. It's been always interesting, and we'll have to have you back on to talk about The Times That Try Men's Souls, another book with stories, which reminds us of this. This is a civil war. Okay.
Yeah, many families were divided, our founders. But thank you so much. It's been a real treat to have this chance to talk with you about it.
That's great. Great. And thank you. And thank you to Jonathan Lane, our producer, the chief executive of Revolution 250. And I want to thank listeners around the country, around the world. Every week we thank folks who are regularly tuning in. And if you're in one of these places and want some of our Revolution 250 swag, send Jonathan an email, jlane@revolution250.org, or if you just want to tell him what you like or what you think we should talk about. He's always happy to communicate. And this week I want to send him an email this week, our friends here in Massachusetts, in Cambridge, Arlington, and Salem, Binghamton, New York, Southington, Connecticut, Red Bank, New Jersey, Missoula, Montana, Cebu City in the Philippines, and Kaohsiung in Taiwan. Thank you all for joining us, and everyone in places between and beyond. Now we will be piped out on the road to Boston.